SITREP World Briefing for May 11, 2026. President Donald Trump rejected Iran's answer to a U.S. proposal aimed at ending the war, calling the response totally unacceptable in a social media post published overnight on Sunday and into early Monday, May 11, 2026. The exchange put Washington and Tehran back at odds after Iran sent its reply through a Pakistani mediator, with the Trump administration signaling that the terms presented by the Iranian side did not meet U.S. conditions for a ceasefire framework. Iran's reported demands included lifting the U.S. naval blockade, recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, and compensation for war damage. Tehran also warned that it would retaliate against any new U.S. strikes and would not allow more foreign warships in the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway that carries a large share of the world's seaborne oil. The rejection underscores how far apart the United States and Iran remain, even after Washington put forward a specific proposal to stop the fighting. For Trump, publicly dismissing Tehran's terms from Washington keeps pressure on Iran before any further diplomacy, while for Iran, the demands over the blockade, the Strait of Hormuz, and war compensation show that any settlement would reach beyond a simple halt in combat and into questions of sovereignty, deterrence, and the future U.S. military presence in the region. Russian President Vladimir Putin said he would prefer former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder as a mediator for the war in Ukraine. German officials questioned both the substance of Putin's latest ceasefire messaging and his choice of mediator, because Schroeder has been associated with the Kremlin. The proposal landed as Europe assessed Putin's ceasefire signals alongside broader Russian security proposals, with governments treating the initiative warily. Berlin's reaction matters because Germany has been a Central European backer of Ukraine, politically, economically, and militarily, and any suggestion that a former German leader could act as an intermediary raises questions about legitimacy and trust. French President Emmanuel Macron opened the Africa Forward Summit in Nairobi on May 11th, using the Kenya gathering to present what he called a new French approach to Africa, based on partnership rather than influence. The summit, organized jointly by France and Kenya, brought together political leaders, business figures, and young entrepreneurs, and marked the first time France staged the event in an English-speaking African country, a deliberate choice as Paris tries to reset strained relationships across the continent and broaden its diplomatic reach. Macron's Nairobi program centered on business, diplomacy, and culture, with an emphasis on younger African innovators, as France seeks to build ties through investment and practical cooperation instead of the older state-to-state model associated with its former colonial role. Cleaner transport was one of the themes highlighted around the summit, including attention to Kenya's growing electric vehicle sector, as Nairobi is considered a regional commercial and technology hub, and France is using the meeting to diversify alliances. Iran rejected the latest U.S. peace proposal on May 10th, as tensions sharpened in and around the Gulf of Oman, a strategic waterway for global energy shipments. Reports of U.S. fire on Iranian-linked tankers added a military dimension to the dispute. Tehran responded by warning of retaliation against American targets in the region. The Gulf of Oman links the Arabian Sea to the Strait of Hormuz, so threats there carry immediate geopolitical weight. French health authorities said a passenger flown home from a cruise ship linked to a hantavirus outbreak has tested positive in France, turning an overseas maritime health emergency into a domestic containment operation. Health Minister Yannick Neuter said the evacuee returned on Sunday, and officials also moved to isolate 4 other French passengers from the same ship, as well as several contact cases while monitoring continued. The action marked France's first confirmed infection tied directly to the vessel evacuation, and showed that authorities were treating the imported case as a public health event requiring rapid tracing. The French response centered on isolation and follow-up, because hantavirus infections can require careful observation even when the number of exposed people is limited. By isolating passengers and close contacts immediately after their arrival from the ship, authorities aimed to break any possible chain of transmission while laboratory and clinical assessments continued in France. The episode also highlighted the challenge European health systems face when outbreaks on international cruise routes move quickly across borders, forcing governments to coordinate evacuation flights, testing, and quarantine measures within hours of passengers landing back in their home countries. Authorities in Spain's Canary Islands placed the cruise ship linked to the hantavirus outbreak under quarantine and began evacuating passengers as an international repatriation effort got underway. Spanish passengers and crew started disembarking under strict health protocols, while arrangements were made for travelers from other countries to return home in stages rather than through an unrestricted release from the vessel. The decision reflected the ship's role as the center of the outbreak and the need to separate passengers, screen them, and move them through controlled transport corridors before onward travel. Medical specialists said the outbreak should not be treated as a repeat of the coronavirus pandemic, stressing that the risk to the wider public was very low, while the ship remained quarantined in the Canary Islands. Reporting on the Andes strain associated with the cases noted that hantavirus is usually linked to rodents and only rarely spreads from person to person, which explains why officials focused on close contact controls rather than mass restrictions. That assessment helped frame the evacuation strategy: isolate exposed travelers, move them out carefully, and avoid unnecessary alarm while public health teams continued to investigate how the virus reached the ship. Sources are available at sitrepbrief.com.